whose sex was assigned female at birth. That will be the qualifying test applied by British Cycling for those who wish to compete in the women's section of the sport at national level. Transgender women will in future compete in an open category alongside men. Before this morning's announcement, transgender women faced a testosterone test to decide their eligibility. Testosterone above a certain level would rule out participation in women's cycling. But, said British Cycling this morning, research studies indicate that even with the suppression of testosterone, transgender women who transition post-puberty retain a performance advantage. The decision follows a fair deal of controversy, with the transgender woman Emily Bridges, who first competed at a junior level as a man, being barred by Cycling's World Federation, the UCI, despite meeting its rules. John Dutton is the head of British Cycling. He spoke to our sports editor Dan Rowan about why the sports policy had been changed now.
It was clear that we had to take another look at the policy from a consultation, listening to those that may be directly affected and impacted, but also the wider cycling community, to look at the medical research that is available at this point in time, and also to look at the legal aspects of any changes. So we've taken all of that work. I do appreciate it's taken us some time to get to this point, and during that period there has been some anxiety, some upset, and I am wholeheartedly empathetic to that situation. But today is about leadership, direction of travel for British Cycling.
When it comes to medical research, what did that tell you?
The medical research very much was focused on both the physiological aspects and also the hormonal aspects. We acknowledge that there is a paucity of research at this point in time, but we can only take and look at what is available to us. So our Chief Medical Officer has headed up that, looking both here domestically but also across the world that is there, and just making sure that on the balance of listening to our athletes, on the balance of everything else, that we make a clear policy going forward, and that's the determination that we've made here today.
So to be clear, the medical research at your disposal told you that it would be unfair to allow transgender women athletes into elite female competition.
The overriding principle of the competitive policy is around fairness, and that has been put together on the basis of the consultation and also the medical research that we have available at this point in time.
Many will welcome this. Others will say if the medical research isn't plentiful and it's not categorical, you maybe should err on the side of inclusivity. What do you say to that?
We respect people's views and opinions. We're also very respectful and empathetic to those people that will be directly impacted by this. We have reached out to athletes as part of the consultation process. We will continue to support riders directly affected and make sure that more than anything we give clarity on the direction of travel across the whole of the cycling community.
Does this effectively rule Emily Bridges, a transgender woman athlete, out of competing for Great Britain?
Under this policy, the riders, including Emily, but there are many more impacted by this, now have clarity about their eligibility to compete.
So that's yes, then it does rule her out of competing for Great Britain in the female category.
The policy that we put in place is really clear, and athletes will make their own interpretation of that.
How much sympathy do you have for Emily?
Enormous amount of sympathy with both Emily and any other rider impacted and affected by this. First of all, an apology about the length of time that it's taken to get to this point, the uncertainty, anxiety, upset that this may have caused, but also absolute compassion that we're dealing with human beings, that we are dealing with people who have aspirations, and we wrap a support structure around that should the athletes wish to take that.
That was John Dutton, the head of British Cycling, speaking to our sports editor, Dan Rowan. Emily Bridges issued a statement shortly before British Cycling's announcement, calling the policy a violent act and accusing the governing body of furthering a genocide against us. We voiced up part of the statement.
I agree that there needs to be a nuanced policy discussion and continue to conduct research, but this hasn't happened. Research isn't being viewed critically, or any discussion about the relevance of the data to specific sports. Any discussion is inherently political and driven by bad faith actors, and the whole discussion is framed by the media, who are driven through engagement by hate and funding from far-right ultra-capitalists. I've given my body up to science for the last 2 years, and this data will be out soon. There is actual, relevant data coming soon, and discussions need to be had.
question of transgender women and their perceived advantage has roiled sport now for some time. UK Athletics has joined swimming, triathlon, rugby league and rugby union in barring those born men from women's competition. Verity Smith is the trans inclusion in sport manager at the trans charity Mermaids. He plays wheelchair rugby league for Leeds Rhinos. Good afternoon, Verity.
Hi, Dan. Nice to meet you.
Good to talk with you too. What is wrong with the qualification for competing against women being for those whose sex was assigned female at birth?
Well, putting trans women into an open category, just stating that they are not women, they're not believed to be who they are. And also by doing that, we're getting rid of role models for the younger generation. I work with transgender diverse youth, and for them, they're not seeing themselves. Emily Bridges was a role model for them young people. She's now not able to compete. And all we're seeing is people saying, well, it's medical research, it's science, but no one's actually stating who they've spoken to, what science is, and they're not being transparent with this. We saw it with World Rugby. They banned 4 trans women in England and a 14-year-old trans girl without any research, without ever meeting them, without assessing them. And a lot of this research are opinion pieces because there's nothing out there at the moment that overtly shows that testosterone is the overarching fact. As a trans man who played women's rugby for 26 years, I played league and union at elite level. I'm now in a wheelchair for the rest of my life because of a much smaller cis female. So we're talking about injuries, we're talking about performance, and we're not actually seeing that from the trans community. We're not having... They're saying that they're having engaging talks with people, but that's not happening. Okay. As Emily stated, they're not looking at this critically.
Verity, let me talk about performance, if I could, because John Dutton said there is a performance advantage. And that is very, very hard for women who were born as women to take if they are in competition against trans women. They think it's just not a level playing field.
Yeah, and what we're talking about is what is a level playing field in sport, otherwise we'd all be exactly the same. So we've already got sports people out there who are celebrated for their genetic differences, but trans people are being looked at as different because of them being trans and talking about this height, weight, overarching advantages. I'm 5'6" and 12.5 stone. I'd never had an advantage playing rugby. I had to play women that were 6'4" and 20 stone, and that's okay. And we're still seeing that within lots of different sports and height and size differences. In cycling, you put your heart, you put your body, you put your soul into that. Emily is a cyclist. She's been out there, she's been doing the research, and she's been competing. And to remove that from somebody without actually spending further time, there's no overarching, as we say, medical research that states that they should be removed. We need to be working with the community. We had more inclusive policies 5 years ago, before media started getting involved, before gender critical groups started getting involved in the government. We need to work on this. We need to work with the young people. When we talk about sport, we're not just talking about rules. We're talking about how these young people go into their lives.
Verity, can I just very briefly, you spoke about Emily Bridges. She referred to this in very strong terms, this policy, as furthering a genocide. A fair number of people will find that very offensive. Do you agree with her?
I agree with the fact that the trans community is being pulled apart. Whatever words Emily Bridges is using, that's her feelings and that's how she wants. At the moment, it is the worst time in history to be a transgender person within sport. I've been put in the newspapers as a dangerous trans woman, the reason why trans women shouldn't be allowed to play. When people know I'm a trans man, they're using it for furthering gain, for scaremongering, and that needs to stop.
We will leave it there. Verity, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, Fair Play for Women is a campaign group which their website says works to protect the rights of women and girls in the UK. Their director of sport is Fiona McAnena. She's met with over 50 sports national and governing bodies on this issue. Good afternoon, Fiona.
Hello, Johnny.
Let me ask you first of all, it's a hard judgment, isn't it, for trans women? It does essentially negate their gender and with it their identity.
Well, sport's not about identity, though. Sport is played by bodies, and we bring ourselves onto the sports field or the cycling track and do our best. I'm concerned about all the women and girls who want to do that and who need to know that sport will be fair. So I think that an open category is a great solution because it doesn't negate anyone's identity. They can absolutely declare any identity they like and they can just turn up and race fairly. And the female category can be protected so that women and girls can also have fair racing. I think it's a good solution that British Cycling have come to.
But it does say effectively to trans women, they are not women.
Well, it says to them, you come to sport with a male body.
And are not women.
Well,
I mean, doesn't it? I mean, let's be blunt about it.
Well, what matters in sport is the body you have. We don't know what is in anyone else's mind, but we can absolutely see who turns up to compete. And we divide most sports into male and female because we know the massive differences in performance that a male body brings compared to a female one. And there's no way to undo that. You know, these policies, Verity says that the policies were much more inclusive a few years ago. They were much more inclusive of male people in the female category. Yes, that's excluding women and girls. And those policies were brought in with no concern at all for the impact on women. That's why we do the work we do. They were brought in with no good science to say that male puberty could be reversed. We know it can't. And now we're finally getting some proper scrutiny of those policies and reverting to fairness. Who would be opposed to that?
Would you like to see this across all sports?
Oh, yes. And we are going to see it across all sports. Because the problem is going to be now for the sports who haven't yet restored fairness for women and girls, that all the trans women who were in cycling and triathlon and athletics and swimming are going to be looking for another sport where they can play in the women's category. Now, what they should be doing, and I hope they will do, is play in the open category in the sports they love. But if they go into women's categories in other sports, that is going to create a lot of trouble for a lot of females, and that's not fair. And we can't just let that happen. Women, it's been very hard for women to have equal opportunity in sport. We really don't need to see women losing that now by having males coming in to our categories.
Fiona McInerney,